Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss a quite farcical Brexit report that has been bandied about, but as amusing as it is to read at times with a critical eye, there's also the worrying angle that people who make decisions in this country may be taking it seriously. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, before I begin, you could tell how bad this report is because it was reported in The Sun. And for those who don't really know about British newspapers, this is a comic of a newspaper, really. But with major economists telling us how badly we're going to be doing as a result of Brexit. The big guns are out for the swivel-eyed loons, wanting to go full steam ahead with a hard Brexit as a global recession looms large on the horizon. And one of their main lines of attack is to argue that delaying Brexit will cost the UK money. And this follows the same brainless line of thinking that Brexit somehow saves the UK money. And I've always likened this to someone quitting their job so that they can save on the petrol money that they use to get to work. It's that level of dumb. So before I take a look at some of their dumber comments, shall we examine the authors? After all, if you're going to produce an economic report, and that's what it is, if you're going to argue that ultimately this is going to cost us, then that means you need an economic analysis. I'm sure there'll be very experienced economists involved. With the money behind these people, they could easily have commissioned top Nobel Prize winning economists for the study. So what do we have here? No. We have some economists in there, but none with any grand credentials like that. The closest thing to an actual academic here is the infamous Patrick Minford of Cardiff University. And for those who don't know who he is the long-standing Conservative economic advisor. He goes right back to Thatcher's days. And he was the one who advised the government to allow British manufacturing just to die out. More recently with Brexit, he was videoed telling ministers that with Brexit, you just have to let your car industry collapse. Forget it. Don't even try and save it, he said. That's the calibre of person producing this report. Nice one. So, anyway, disappointing that there's nobody with any international standing in there, but let's go on to the actual claims. Note, have no interest in arguments about the if we do this, then other countries will react in this way. I think we've all had enough of these Brexiteers trying to claim how the rest of the world will react if we do or do not do certain things, because all the Brexit thinking on this has been exposed as utter bollocks already. No, I'm only interested in cold hard facts. Now, one thing that this report tries to claim is that our trade with the EU has been flat over a number of years, but that our trade with other countries has increased substantially. What it fails to point out, however, is that our trade has generally only increased with those nations as a result of EU trade deals and agreements. Obviously, if the EU arrange favourable trading terms with a country, let's say the United States or Japan, for example, then of course our trade is going to increase there, but it increases as a result of our membership of the EU. It also fails to note that our trade with some of those countries that they allude to has actually fallen back since we started on the Brexit path. When you look at the detail in the report, what you notice is that some of the things they say were true up to 2016 when we had the Brexit referendum. In other words, they're bringing back the arguments that they used during the Brexit referendum. The problem is we've had a few years since then. And actually, some of that trade that they're talking about having increased has actually fallen back since we decided to go with Brexit. And of course, that trade is going to fall back still further as a result of the global recession that is coming as countries fall back on their trading blocs, their major trading partners. And, finally, although it's true to say that our trade with the EU has been flat over the past few years, yeah, it has. That flat is still about half our trade. It's very close to half our trade. And their plan is to erect trade barriers to not only that half of our trade, but also to every nation with whom we have a trade agreement or deal via the EU, including the United States, who are not proposing a free trade deal with us at all. When you look at the United States proposals, it is not a free trade deal. It is a You buy more of our stuff, but we're not going to buy more of yours. In fact, we'll actually buy less of your stuff. But that's fine because you won't produce as much stuff anyway, because this trade deal will knacker your production. The second big mistake that this report makes is to talk about so-called World Trade Organization partners, as if there's such a thing for a start. I mean, there's a level of ignorance about this, which, I mean, sure, they're fully seized of. This is more the ignorance of the people who would read such a report, because there's no such thing as a World Trade Organization partner, by definition. If you're on World Trade Organization terms with someone, it's because you have no deal with them. You have no agreement. You have nothing with them. So they're not a partner. But should we say countries with whom we trade on WTO terms, which is not that many. Now, I talked about yesterday how the WTO are going to have no bearing on our trade next year, as the US are completely hobbling them at the moment. But these people talk as if those exports, they talk about service exports being this huge chunk of our overall exports. And they talk about them as if they're on the increase, and they're not. And they're not even flat. These service exports to these so-called WTO partners that the report talks about are actually falling away badly. They were on the increase. Then Brexit happened. Since then, they've fallen back by 20%. The trend is downwards. You know, since the Brexit referendum, these service exports have gone down by 20%. They don't mention that in their report. Essentially, what the report seems to be doing, as I say, is using the same data that they used for the Brexit referendum. But that ignores what happened since 2016, where the trends are now much more worrying. And you certainly can't make the conclusions they're making. But the fact that the report trumpets WTO rules is the biggest embarrassment in this whole thing. It just completely invalidates the whole report, because WTO rules don't currently exist even now, really. The rules sort of do, but they're not implemented. And a rule that is not enforced is no rule at all. The US has stopped the adjudication panel doing its work. If you have no adjudication panel, then what happens when a country doesn't follow the rules? Nothing at all. And the US is, of course, planning to withdraw from the organisation entirely. And this alone, that alone, makes this whole report objectively worthless, because their whole argument is based on World Trade Organization terms being better than EU trade agreements and deals, not only with the EU, but the rest of the world. But I'll go on for a little bit. Another major point of interest in the report was that it would cost us billions to remain in the single market, hundreds of billions, in fact, based on what it calls benefits from better regulations as a result of leaving the EU. So what are these better regulations? There aren't any. Honestly, the report doesn't actually allude to any regulations that we can put in place that will be better than the EU's regulations. If you read the report and what they're talking about, they're not talking about better regulations. They're talking about getting rid of regulations, completely obliterating them. And the regulations they want to get rid of are workers' rights, every last one of them, including, of course, the time directive. But all of them. I mean, in other words, basically, they reckon that we as a country will save money by stopping your rights to paid holidays, breaks in the working day, flexible working. If bosses can, hire and fire as they see fit, apparently we'll save a load of money. So you'll have no job security at all. You could come in one day and be told to piss off, and there'll be no redundancy or anything silly like that. In addition, they want to abolish all data protection laws, so our personal data will be available for anyone to buy and use as they see fit. You have no rights to it at all, and no saying what it can and cannot be used for. That's what they mean. And here's the thing. I mean, there's two sides to this argument. First of all, if you look at top economists, they will argue that that actually won't build your economy at all. But secondly, let's say it did. Is that a good thing? When you personally, as the worker, will suffer financially out of this. Is it really beneficial for a country's economy to get a boost if all it means is the billionaires get a few extra billion and the 99.9% of the population actually are worse off? No, it's not. But like I say, it wouldn't even give an economic boost. The figures that they're basing it on are just made up. And they throw in a few statements like this by trying to bring COVID into it as well. So they say, for example, the EU state aid rules have inhibited the ability of member states to help ailing industries. No, they haven't. That's not true at all. as is evidenced by the fact that EU countries have been able to use state aid. Nothing in the rules prevents it. What it does prevent is a government only giving state aid to the companies of their mates and not considering giving state aid to those who don't donate to the ruling party. That's what they object to. They also say that the data protection laws inhibit our ability to implement a tracing app. But EU countries have them in operation. There are EU countries that have tracing apps in operation. We don't, but that's because we're bog useless. And when coming up with their calculation, this was absolutely hilarious. So then you look to yourself, so what do you base this calculation on? Where's your data? There's none. There's no working out. Do you know what they do with this figure? They cite a group called Open Europe. Is this a group of top economists in Europe, independent economists? No, it's a political group set up and paid for by those behind Brexit in the UK. And there's no way of tracing back how this figure was arrived at. Basically, someone made it up. Someone just made up a figure and put it in there. That's it. There's no reference to any working out. No reference to even the data it was used to work it out. So they can't show the working on it. In fact, the more you read the report, the more it exposes just how embarrassing the Brexit arguments are. Because sometimes economic arguments do over or underestimate the impact of certain policies. There's always an element of the unknown in predicting economic futures, not as much as Brexiteers would have you believe. The margin for error is not as large as you would think. Otherwise, it would be impossible for people to reliably make investment decisions. Investment bankers are paid an absolute fortune. Of course, you can work it out. But the calculations, even when it's an over or an underestimate, are at least based on something. These are not based on anything at all. They just say, here's the figure. Yeah, how did you work it out? Open Europe came up with it. How did they work it out? I don't know. You go to Open Europe, how did you work it out? They just pull numbers out the hat or their arse without explaining where they come from. In this report, they cite the Office for National Statistics for some figures. Good, okay, great. I say they cite, that's all they do. They just say we got it from the Office for National Statistics. They don't link to any actual report. They don't even give the name of it. So you can't actually then go to the ONS site and find the report they're talking about. And I suspect the reason for that is because if you actually go to the Office for National Statistics and you were to do what they've done with that data, you would not come to the same conclusion, because what I suspect they've done is use data from years ago, and they don't want to draw attention to the fact that the data they are using is not recent data. And then at the end of it, it tries to use a survey, which tries to say that the majority of people in the UK are opposed to extending the transition period, which is actually odd, because even when you use their data, it's 44% that are opposed to extending. Well, that's not a majority in my book. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Their data is absolute rubbish. And I thought it'd be a bit odd because it's completely at odds with a poll run by YouGov, which is known to be reliable because YouGov and Ipsos-Mori are the only polling companies in this country who, at the end of the day, how do you test the effectiveness of a polling company? You can look at their methodology, and the methodology given by YouGov is impressive. But also, at the end of the day, election results, do they get them right? Those two do. Other companies don't. So, so it tries to. So it was at odds with YouGov. So I thought, well, that's a bit odd. Let's have a little look at this. And sure enough, when you read their 3 lines of methodology, 3 lines of their methodology on this wide-ranging survey, it does show that they've taken no steps whatsoever to ensure that it wasn't weighted towards a particular political bias. For all we know, this survey was conducted at a Brexit Party meeting. It was only weighted by age, gender and region. That was it. That's it. Or, in other words, utterly worthless. There's no attempts to make it genuinely representative of the population. Whereas you look at the methodology of reliable polling companies, and it's much more detailed, and they make clear how they've weighted it. In other words, they've stacked it heavily with Brexiteers. It never at any point references any actual reports. I talked about it didn't reference the ONS reports, didn't reference any reports at all, as a genuine study would do. This is deliberate, because those of a critical mind will have to put in more time to checking the claim. So I had to go and actually find things. and those who can't think critically will never check references anyway. In other words, it's a report written for the gullible and the lazy. But anyway, the report is linked in the description below if you'd like to read it for yourself. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.